So thanks for joining everyone. This is our last IDE seminar, which sucks. I said to the rest of the people in the office today that it always feels like the momentum is like really building, and then it's the last webinar that we have scheduled before the sailing season gets crazy. So I think it's been a great year, a great series of webinars that built on our series from last year, and we really appreciate everyone taking the time to register and attend the evenings that we've been hosting. Huge thank you to Andrea and to Andrew, who's not on the call tonight, but to Andrea and Andrew from Inclusion Inc. for guiding us through these. It's been really great. And I think that these are one of the most impactful things that we do for IDE at Sail Canada. It gives everyone a chance to ask some questions and learn about all of the other great things that we're doing. And I don't know, it just feels really tangible and really real when we do these types of things and we see everybody on the calls. So thank you both so much, Andrea, for guiding us through these. Tonight's webinar is not as much of a presentation type of webinar. It's more, I think it's going to be kind of like a sort of rolling conversation. Andrea is going to very much be the host, but then I'm going to co-host with her and with Ryan, our CEO from Sail Canada, who's on the call. But it's kind of everyone's forum tonight. If you have a question that you want to ask, or if there's anything in particular you want to discuss, tonight's the night. Please don't hesitate to put your hand up or speak up. Obviously, don't speak over everyone, but if there's a moment when you have a chance to speak up, you are more than welcome to ask your questions. We've had a couple of questions that have come in from people both through registration and from my call out asking for some more questions. So we will sort of start with those, and that will likely build to further questions for people to ask. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Andrea.
Thanks, Nick. And yeah, just a pleasure to be here and to have had the opportunity to go through this series again with you folks and lots of learnings along the way. I'm going to begin by just sharing a territory acknowledgement. I'm in the Rocky Mountains this week on spring break with my little 12-year-old, who's not so little. She's actually now officially a bit taller than me. But we're on the territories of the Ktunaxa people and close to Akim community, which is about 15 minutes down the road. And it's Ktunaxa territory stretches into Washington State and Idaho State, and then up into BC, both here in the Kootenays, the East Kootenays, but also into the Columbia Valley. So lots of opportunities to learn about the territories and the peoples here, and where Akim Nation is about, as I said, about 15 minutes from where I am tonight, but it's also home to a residential school. And I've had the opportunity to visit that school only on the outside. It's now actually very interestingly owned and managed by the community, and they've made it a golf resort. And to me, that's a fascinating opportunity for them to have created economic development for their community out of something so tragic. So, just a little sharing as we kind of explore and think about the different ways that we're navigating and working with different communities. So we're going to move into the session as Nick described. It's very much a Q&A session tonight. We are welcome you to raise your hands and to share questions that you have, and then we'll navigate through the ones that were pre-submitted as well. And I want to welcome Manu, who's here from the IDE committee as well, who I think will support some questions as they come up as well. And Yannick's here, who has been on the IDE committee. And Lisa, I think you just joined too. So lots of folks. Yeah, so throw questions in the chat for us or raise your hand if you want to come off mute and share those. But we can get started with some that came in advance if we don't get any right away. Okay, well, perhaps we'll begin with one that's in the that was pre-submitted. So I'm going to read off one that came in for us, and we did get several. One of the questions that we got was around thinking about how we can foster more inclusivity and diversity and equity in sailing. And I thought that was a really good question and one that we've been trying to share throughout this series in various ways. But one of the things that kind of struck me is when we think about the different communities we want to work with and how we want to build more inclusion for those communities, one of the first things I think we need to do is build relationships with those communities, both in terms of recognizing there might be agencies that are serving those communities in our existing community, but also inviting them in as you build those relationships and asking them to co-create what some of those programs and services might look like. And we think about that as a bit of a continuum. Quite often in our society and in our programs, and sport is notorious for this, we try and create programs for folks. And one of the shifts in this work is to think about how we can create those programs with folks, and ultimately also empower them to create programs for themselves with our support. And so I think that's a key kind of shift and opportunity for us to consider as we go forward. So I'll lead with that answer to that question and invite someone to pop up a hand and ask a next question, or also maybe tap Ryan or Nick to answer one of the next questions that came in previously.
Andrea, I have a question right off the top. So,
Okay.
Andrea is, if for those who don't know her as well as we do at Sail Canada, Andrea is a very multifaceted sport person. She's not specifically sailing related. So, a lot of the ways that you answer these questions, I think, are very broadly inclusive of all sorts of different sport and organizations, even beyond sport. I know that you work with I forget the acronym. I think it was GLAM, libraries, museums, like the all sorts of different types of organizations. So when Andrea answers these questions for us, she's been working with Sail Canada for 5 years now, 4 years, 5 years, quite a few years,
Yep.
um, and brings a great perspective. But can you share some examples, Andrea, of good co-creation from any sort of organization that you've worked with that's really been successful? So that, and if if you have a great sailing example that you could share, that would be awesome. But if not, just some things to sort of give some listeners tonight some ideas about at their sailing program. How could they co-create something with a community organization?
Yeah, I'm going to use an example that's about a decade old, or when it started, it was about a decade old, because I think the journey is really interesting. And I also think we need to think about the time that this work can take. And so, about a decade ago, I had the opportunity to start working with Aboriginal Sports Circle, which, for those of you who don't know, Aboriginal Sports Circle is the national Indigenous sport body. And in each province and territory, there is an Indigenous Sport Council that is kind of has provincial scope. Those are great organizations, by the way, to build relationships with. And each of them are kind of at different places in terms of the work they're doing, but a lot of them are doing really amazing programming, often that leads to the North American Indigenous Games, which happens every 4 years. And next will happen in 2027 in Calgary. And what we did with the Aboriginal Sports Circle at the time, they didn't really have staff capacity and they were trying to actually get more government support. They had very little government support, actually, pretty much none when we started. But they had a vision about building out an Indigenous sport pathway that aligned to the long-term athlete development models, but looked at what the cultural differences were, because Indigenous sport has thrived in this country for decades, but hasn't often been connected to the mainstream sports system. And so we had a really amazing opportunity with them to work with over 200 Indigenous sport leaders across Canada and to get their perspectives on what the Indigenous sport pathway looked like, where it connected and didn't connect to the mainstream sport pathway, and to map a long-term participant development pathway that was unique to their circumstance. And what I use that example because, as I mentioned, 10 years ago, I started working with them in 2014. And last spring, I was invited by Aboriginal Sports Circle to come to a training of Indigenous sport leaders to, and the whole body of work that we created was called the Indigenous Long-Term Participant Development Pathway. And there's now a training that sports can take, which I would highly recommend your sport organization take, if whether you're whatever level you're at, as well as the Aboriginal coaching modules. Both of those are great pieces to build relationship and cultural understanding about Indigenous sport. And that work, when I was invited a year ago, it was to come and to help train Indigenous leaders who were now leading that. So Aboriginal Sports Circle had built the capacity and is now leading that work. And they were training Indigenous leaders to facilitate that work across Canada. And that was just like this full circle moment of like, they didn't have the capacity when we started. They built the capacity. They were now leading this work. And to be invited in as a guest to help co-facilitate that was just a really beautiful moment. But again, it took a decade. And some of this work takes time, and that relationship building is so crucial, and particularly in communities that have experienced trauma, it can take a really long time to build that trust and relationship. Hopefully that was
Okay.
an example, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. Those modules that you mentioned, are they available through CAC or through the Aboriginal Sports Circle?
Aboriginal Sports Circle is now hosting both the Aboriginal coaching modules as well as the Indigenous long-term participant development pathways, and you can reach out to them and they will help you coordinate and host those.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Andrea. We're going to turn it over to Ryan for the next question.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know if you were going to ask me the question I was going to answer, or if I'm asking myself the
Hey,
question and
we
answer.
can do that if you want to do a little back and forth, no problem. So we received a question from one of our registrants that we're interested in Sail Canada's support for supporting sailors with disabilities. And so, Ryan, what is Sail Canada doing to support sailors with disabilities?
There you go. I hope this doesn't feel too kind of forced, because I'm having fun. I appreciate the question. First of all, I love this, and it's worth noting that my start in coaching was through the cadet program, through the Sea Cadet program, where we didn't differentiate between anyone who walked through the door. So I had the opportunity to coach sailors who had hearing impediments, vision, some amputations along the way, and I learned naively at the time how to meet sailors where they were, and functionally meet them in whatever capabilities they may have had. But with that, I also appreciate having building communities and creating opportunities for full groups to participate. So the big focus for the CanSail panel and the CanSail Para panel over the last little while has been creating a coaching sailors with disabilities professional development module. So that is specifically geared for current CanSail instructors and coaches to again take this professional development module, and most of it is focused on creating a safe space, and then perhaps more, I'm going to say more importantly, how to use lifting devices, slings, and whatnot. With that, and Andrea, very much to your point on not creating programs for communities, but with communities, very much to the testament of Sam and Nick. We actively engaged with the Able Sail Network of Canada to develop that. So it's not just a different set of checklists. There's a lot of resources on the Sail Canada website and on the Able Sail Canada, or on the Able Sail Network's website, as far as what resources are available out there. I would love to do more on I'm going to call it the Paralympic stream. Unfortunately, the parasailing is no longer in the games. We're working with World Sailing to actively lobby to have that segment reinstated. So we're in a little bit of kind of back and forth now on what the future of high performance looks like. Maybe not the best audience to plug for fundraising, but at the end of the day, we do need more resources to help those communities. So that's the big one right now, as I said, is on the instructor development piece. So we do have 2 clinics planned for this summer, one in concert with the Mobility Cup, which, if you're not aware of it, is probably the coolest regatta of the summer. And then another instructor development clinic planned in, I believe it's Toronto, with the Toronto Able Sail Network for this coming spring.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. If any other questions are developing from that, Lisa, I'm so sorry I didn't notice your hand was up before I passed it over to Ryan. So let's go back over to Lisa.
That's quite all right. My just question is just Nick, as you mentioned that Andrea's worked with a number of different sports and Aboriginal Sports Circle and like large multi-sport organizations. I just wanted to get your perspective because you have worked with sailing for a while, on where you see the things that you've seen in sailing over the last 5 years, where you see us being quite similar to other sports within the IDE space, and then where you see maybe we have bigger challenges, I think, than some of the other sports, or you've seen maybe it's a harder needle to move in sailing than you have in some of the other sports. I just wanted to get your perspective there on us with respect to what you've seen across the space.
Thanks, Lisa. I feel like that's a really big question. I could probably spend the whole rest of the hour on that. But I'll give you a couple pieces that pop to mind. One, I think sport overall has been on a really big learning curve in the IDE space over the last few years. We've seen tremendous progress, and we know that there's a lot of work to do across every sport. I think the other piece I would note is that some of the models that Sail has been, I guess, a part of for like decades, generations, can be challenging. So, kind of club-based models in terms of like memberships to clubs is kind of what I'm referencing there. I think there's some innate kind of discrimination that's been built into that process, and that application process over time. And so that's one piece that I think we noted early on, that I think is a piece that needs to be unpacked by each club and kind of looked at what are the opportunities to shift some of the rules. And rules in sport are probably one of the things we highlight most frequently in our work across all sports, because it's the way things have been done, and they've been done for a long time and not really questioned in a lot of cases because they served the people who wrote the rules. But more people are involved that didn't write the rules, and the rules weren't really written for them. So it's an opportunity to just explore what are some of those pieces that are creating barriers to new participants, and what are some of the opportunities to, as we referenced earlier, work with different community groups and individuals to explore what they need to be part of sailing. And we know that financial barriers are consistent again across a lot of sports, but sailing is one where we've heard that consistently throughout our work, that continues to be a place where we need to spend energy understanding what some of those barriers are and how we break those down. I also think, kind of building on Ryan's point, like access, and why by access I mean accessibility, is a challenge as well in terms of looking at both, I'm going to say disabilities, but also we know that our demographics are aging and we tend to age into disabilities. So people who have been sailors may find that sailing is becoming less accessible to them as they age. And are there things we can do there to help continue their sailing journey? So I'll maybe pause there because, as I said, I could go on for a long time on that, but hopefully that addressed some of the areas you're hoping to get to.
Great, thanks.
Thanks for that, Andrea. Thanks for the question, Lisa. Ryan, do you have a question for me?
Well, Nick, my question to you is, as the IDE lead, albeit not the chair any longer, would be what has been done in this space by Sail Canada and what is being done by Sail Canada.
Great question, Ryan. So these webinars that we have worked together with Inclusion Inc. to host, this is going to be the 8th one in 2 years. So right off the bat, there's something. There's 8 hours that we've invited members from all over Canada to join and to learn and listen and hear perspectives and I think answer that question kind of over and over. What's being done, what has been done, what's going to be done. And the webinars are a big part of that. The fact that we create these platforms for people to ask questions and learn and listen, that's a huge part of the puzzle. We've released resources. I shared a link a little higher in the chat, but I can put it in again later. There's resources that clubs have asked for various different reasons. How to write a land acknowledgement or a waterway acknowledgement specific to your club. How to welcome new participants to clubs. How to build programs that include people from all different areas at the clubs. So that's all stuff that has been done that we have shared. It's all public. You don't have to log in anywhere to see it. You don't even have to be a member at a club. It's available for you. What is going to happen, and I might be stealing some thunder from Ryan here, but we are releasing another batch of funding from Sport Canada funding for our community sport for all program. I think we received about $100,000 that we're going to be able to disperse throughout communities who apply. So that's something I would highly encourage you to take a look for via the website, social media, and it'll probably be in the newsletter, and apply and receive some funding. That, money helps at the end of the day, whether it's paying people to offer programming, to pay for people to develop programming. It always, as my husband would say, money is the best lotion. So it will help these programs happen. So please apply for those. And that's something that we don't just click a button or put our hand up and say, yeah, we'll apply for that. That sounds good. That's something that our staff, Sam and Ryan, spent several hours over several days with lots of input from Andrea from Inclusion Inc. as well to be successful in that funding. So please understand, it's not just a free check that comes in. It takes a lot of work for us to get that and a lot of effort on our part. So we're super excited when it happens, and we're super excited to be able to share it to keep this type of thing going. There's lots more, and where I would encourage everyone to see the next things that are on the horizon would be in the Sales Canada IDE action plan, which is on that same page that's in the chat now a few times, which was developed early stages of our IDE journey with Inclusion Inc. And is a great template if you're wondering, how can I do this same type of work at my club or organization? Take a look at that action plan and you will see how you can create a plan that will affect every area of your programming, of your community, of your club, from absolute top to bottom. It's a huge document. It's not overwhelming. You don't need 6 screens to read it all at once, but it's definitely a couple of scrolls. But the sort of impacts of all the steps of that plan are pretty robust. So I would say that's probably one of the major things that we were able to accomplish over the last few years, and it's something that we're sticking to and will continue to inform everything that Sail Canada does. It's constantly referenced and will be constantly referenced in the future. So check that out. And I would say that this ends my answer to that question. Maybe Andrea, I'll give a quick space here if anyone has a question, wants to put their hand up or put anything in the chat. But then we'll go to Andrea for the next question about how sailing fosters inclusion. Any quick questions in the meantime? No? Okay, Andrea, over to you.
Sorry, Nick, can I ask a question, or do we have to?
Yeah, of course, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you said there's 100K available from Sport Canada for sailing. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And what happens with that 100K? Like how does that get distributed, or what programs does that go into, or how do sailors who may qualify for IDE apply for such funding?
So all of the criteria will be, if it hasn't already come out, I think it may have. Double check me on that, Ryan. I can't remember. I've been working on some other stuff, but The criteria to apply to the program will all be in the application. Once the applications are received, they're reviewed for, a few different things. We like programs to be running can sail programs, for example. We don't want it to just be, Rob Pike Sailing School off of his cottage dock that doesn't really
No, no, of
contribute
course.
to the community at all.
Yeah.
So there's some criteria Sam shared in the chat there. Sam's been the lead on that project. It's posted on our website, and the deadline is March 27th. So 9 days from now. And yeah, you can see all the criteria and then sort of determine exactly how it's dispersed.
Right. So it's program based.
It's program based. Yeah, it's community sport for all. I think the overarching goal is to get people involved in sailing programs.
Right. And is there like an age range that's targeted at?
No, I don't think so.
It's open to underserved communities.
Right.
So you asked the question. There is a reporting structure and a pretty strict one on our side. So fundamentally, we would want to know which communities you brought in, and functionally, Rob, I'm going to suggest that it's an effort to de-risk trying new things. Right? If we look at a typical yacht club sailing school, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, with a pretty specific age range in mind. So the hope here is that clubs can offer some part-time employment, de-risk that side of things, and then kind of play around a little bit. And by that, I mean, at the end of the day, we're still just trying to get people on the water. But by fostering new relationships with new community members, and again, de-risking that HR side, we're hoping that the seeds that we're planting today through the season and next, that those programs would not need government subsidies down the line, and functionally those programs would be established enough that they can carry on their own. But for now, for at least the next 2 years, it's that is the approach, and it's 95K per year this year and next. As far as I know that it's a short turnaround. So this isn't specifically from Sport Canada. It's actually from Community Sport for All. So it's its own independent funding envelope. And we found out that we got the grant on Friday. We met with the program advisor on Monday, and we're able to get it out in the newsletter yesterday afternoon.
Goodness gracious, that's quite a turnaround. As an outsider to sailing, and a daughter who's sort of quite enthusiastic about it and has sort of come into it sideways. Obviously, the biggest obstacle for sailing, as we all know on this call, is funding, and it's an expensive sport, and it's both an expensive sport, and also the perception of the sport is it's extremely expensive. Like it's considered to speak frankly, it's a rich white people's sport that I couldn't possibly go into that because it's not for me or whatever, and so it's a big row to hoe or whatever the expression is, and I appreciate all your efforts on this. It's a wonderful, wonderful sport for so many people, and there is a lot of obstructions in society to it, and I just want to say thank you to all your efforts on this. So I think it's what I'm hearing here tonight is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Andrea, I am going to ask you the next question here. And I'm actually going to change the one that I said I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So, what's the best way to introduce non-traditional gender identities to fairly traditional groups to respect them and their privacy when providing some warning to the established group?
Yeah, I thought that question was so interestingly worded. So thank you for whomever submitted it. There's a couple pieces to that I think are helpful in terms of navigating understanding gender identities. And I think the first is to recognize that gender identity is not binary. It's not man and woman as we sort of once assumed. And we've operated that way for a really long time. So there's a cultural shift that we're in the midst of. That we need to recognize and appreciate, and recognize one, that not everyone understands that that cultural shift has happened, and that there are a range of gender identities that we need to be appreciating, supporting, and recognizing as we go forward. So there's an education piece for the folks that don't understand or know that that shift has occurred. And so I would encourage sharing resources about gender identities. There's one I really love called the Gender Unicorn. which is available online if you Google. And it talks about both gender identity as well as sexual identities, and just kind of gives you a little bit of a like broadening perspectives, I would say. But I think one of the other pieces to think about is, and when you're trying to create space for the range of gender identities, using things like pronouns in your introductions, on name tags, on registration forms can be a really helpful way to start to share to the community that you're recognizing and creating safety in people sharing those identities, but then you want them to have a safe experience when they do come as well. And in our sports system, we're still really working with a lot of organizations right now to actively support gender identity work, and particularly trans identities. And the sports system's got a long way to go, to be blunt. I think we have worked with the assumption of the gender binary for a long time, and so we're shifting a lot of perspectives in this work. But ultimately, when we think about the space of inclusion, diversity, and equity, we need to think about how we're including rather than excluding. And if we don't do work around gender identity, we are actively excluding folks that maybe don't fit in the category of man and woman as we've previously identified and kind of cornered people into. So I'll maybe pause there and see if you've got an additional question for me, Nick, or if that helped.
I think that's great. Question from Jaya. Jaya? Sorry about the pronunciation.
Sorry, I'm not exactly dressed appropriately, but we're talking about making everyone feel welcome where they are. Andrea, I really like what you shared about opening with language, because and what it brings to mind is just the unavoidability of conflict in some of these situations. Like, it only takes one person saying, like, the hell, I'm putting my pronouns on my screen, to have this whole sort of rippling feeling of, oh, shoot, what do I do? What do I do? And have people sort of crawl back in their shell about, like, oh, we stuck our neck out. We tried to do the right thing. It blew up in our face. Oh my God, they're a donor. Like, I really encourage folks to have a what if conversation around conflict, because it is too easy to undo all the work just by having one explosive interaction. And we can do better. We can, any board, any administration has dealt with some degree of conflict, and we can prepare ourselves for that in a way that is loving and patient and honors relationship with a long view to cultivating growth.
Yeah, thanks so much for layering in with that. I think those are such important pieces to share. And I'm going to kind of maybe give two more pieces to my answer with that lens on it. The first is recognizing that all of us are on a learning journey, always, I hope. And recognizing that we're also going to always, like, all of us are going to make mistakes along the way. And so creating the grace for people to make a mistake and to have the opportunity to have a conversation about it. And I think, to your point about conflict, we are at a time when, one, I don't think a lot of us got the training we need around conflict negotiation and management in whatever training we had to get to where we're at now. So I think that's a skill that we actually need to do work on as organizations and as leaders in these spaces, because conflict right now feels almost inevitable in a lot of situations, and we need to be prepared to dig in and have those hard conversations. And secondly, for the individual or group of individuals that do show up to programs and experience, I'm going to call it violence towards their identity. And your example around someone, kind of actively saying they won't put their pronouns in is a violence. It is a harm that someone from those identities experiences. And, it might be little pieces, it might be a bigger piece, but it does cause harm. And so I think we also need to be really conscious about checking in with those participants and having the conversation about what they need to be supported, checking in if they're okay, and figuring out, to your point, how we do better as we go forward. And creating policies can be one really good place to do that. And then that gives you a line, and often actions within that policy to then be like, okay, this happened. We don't tolerate that. And being really clear on that as part of your practice as an organization, so that there's a place to go to be like, this is whether it's code of conduct or policy, and then what you're going to do to rectify it. And that's a bit of a gap in a lot of our systems and sport right now.
Thanks for that question, Jaya. That was great. And thanks, Andrea, for a couple additional pieces there. Rob, your hand's up.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Andrea, for your comments on that. I have a child athlete who doesn't necessarily fall into traditional gender roles, and I don't want to get into the details of that, but she's been lucky enough to qualify for World Youth Championships for a couple of years. And World Sailing's definition of gender is quite specific, and we're working with, we have to function within that for the time, function within that, and I'm assuming everyone's on this call is sort of generally aware of that. And I also have a ton of experience in the sailing world, but I do have in the skiing world, and I know this idea of genders not falling into traditional binary definitions has come up in freestyle skiing, and I know there's been some wonderful open creative solutions for that, for youth competitions and so forth that have been very beneficial to the participants, just in terms of open, having open categories or thinking more broadly about how that accommodation is made. So that's really all my comment is. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I know firsthand what it's like working with World Sailing on some of those definitions. So it's something that one of our former board members, Zach Baum, was involved with. I sort of passed it over to him. I'm not sure if he's still working on it or not, but our next caller on the line here, Kate McLennan, may have a good idea. Kate's the chair of the Sail Canada board, just so that everyone knows. Kate, over to you.
On to that, Rob, the Sail Canada position on the transgender policy for World Sailing, we fought as hard as we possibly could to go against what they were proposing and to educate World Sailing on the difficulties with the policy. I had conversations with the CAO directly hours before the vote on the policy happened in November. What it came down to is they acknowledge that the policy isn't perfect, but right now with the research, there is no perfect policy or answer in their opinion. Obviously, we all have our own opinions on what the best policy and procedures ought to be. We have the Sail Canada ones, which are what our board supports, but the World Sailing policy is in flux. It is intended to be adjusted as further research happens, as further discussions happens. I wouldn't expect the current policy to be the policy 3, 4, 5 years from now. I know that might not be the answer that's going to help your child, but at Sail Canada on a board level and at World Sailing through our World Sailing delegation, we are doing what we can to educate those who are able to vote at World Sailing, or those who are creating those policies at World Sailing, to make them as inclusive as they possibly can be.
Thanks, Kate. Can I just layer into one of the pieces? I'm going to say across the international system, we have seen many international governing bodies come up with policies that I would say many of them are actively transphobic. Domestically, we have more autonomy to do the right thing and to create more inclusive gender policies. And so that's where we've been really trying to encourage that to happen across the sports system. The other piece I just wanted to add into that, though, is that I think it's so crucial that we have people in those conversations and in that policy development who have lived experience of being non-binary, trans, gender fluid. The range of gender identities, I think, is really crucial to that. And that needs to be part of the conversation. And right now, we've also seen that a lot of policies have been developed without that perspective. And so that's one piece we're kind of actively advocating for right now.
And so just to clarify, like the Sail Canada policy position is that for any regattas that are governed by Sail Canada or through the community level or anything like that, athletes are able to sail sorry, I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this. So generally, most regattas are open class regattas. There is no female or male classes. But if there was going to be a female, a best female award, that is an opt-in award, and it is based on someone's own gender identity. So if someone identifies as a female, sorry, as a woman, I'm using incorrect language here, please forgive me. If someone identifies as a woman or as a girl, they are able to self-identify and opt in to receiving a woman's or a girl's award, if that is an award that is at a regatta. And I know that that's not perfect and we're still working on it, but we're allowing athletes to self-identify. And we are lucky to be in a sport where, unlike a number of other sports like gymnastics, we don't have gendered class categories throughout the majority of regattas.
Perfect. Thank you, Kate. Okay. Any more questions before I ask Ryan another question? Does anybody have anything else? Okay. So, Ryan, we get asked this frequently. I think we've all had a couple of good laughs over the last 2 months while we were running these webinars, particularly in my inbox when I would send out reminders and we'd get nasty replies. And a lot of them were, you know, what a waste of time, what a waste of energy, what a waste of resources, what a waste of money. So one thing that we thought would be important to highlight tonight would be, what does IDE, Sail Canada's IDE, you know, budget sort of look like? So Ryan, can you share with us what has been spent by Sail Canada through funding, through our own budget, that type of thing, on IDE over the last couple of years?
Happy to. I can't give the entire history of our spending on it. I can only speak to more recent years. I chuckled a little bit when Nick mentioned the emails that we do inevitably get after the webinar invitations are sent out. And Nick, you made a great comment. I want to say on the first webinar, if not the third, just to the effect of those quote unquote nasty emails help fuel you and keep you motivated and excited about being in this space. For me, one of the numbers that I really can't reconcile in my head is that our sport growth historically over the last decade or so has been flat, and yet we've added somewhere to the tune of 10 million people to the Canadian population in the same amount of time. And that speaks to me on a community building level, on a marketing level. Rob made a great point about how we're kind of branded as a rich white guy sport. My counter to that is you can get into the sport for $100 life jacket, ideally Helly Hansen, that you buy from Canadian Tire. I got to do a corporate plug. You asked me about money. But at the end of the day, this sport is accessible, maybe not necessarily to everyone based on perceptions of it. So the money that we've pulled in, and I say pull in for the most part, this is almost entirely government grant and Kind of the weird, ironic twist of COVID is that there was a lot of IDE money that was made available through that, through Return to Sport and a few others. So our spend from Community Sport for All and COC, the Canadian Olympic Committee from last year, was $44,000 with an additional $24,000 top up specifically from IDE. That does not include, and Sam, forgive me if I get the number wrong, but the 75, if not 85, from Community Sport for All for the program for the Sailing for All initiative from last year. So, in the tune of 180 on IDE and helping create community access last year alone. Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers in front of me specifically for, say, 2020 through to 2023. But from what I understand, those are more or less our historicals. Now that return to sport money and the quote unquote COVID money is not available, that begs the question of how do we continue to make webinars such as this sustainable and economically viable. And that's the fun part about my job, is making sure that we continue to have these conversations. Because again, very much to Nick's point, we've built a lot of momentum. We're getting closer to the start of the season, and now we want to make sure that we carry that momentum forward for years to come. But yeah, roughly 90K, give or take, and a lot more work to do.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So it's coming up, 7:45. We don't really like to run these too much past an hour. I know personally my attention span tends to start dropping off at that point, but I have a pretty short attention span. Although I feel like I'm kind of like Andrea and could talk on an IDE webinar for hours. But so are there any questions out there? We have a few more in our list, but I just wanted to put it out to the group and see if there's anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to discuss so far tonight. Please don't be shy. We can always go to our list if we don't get them. Put your hand up. We'll put it in the chat if you don't have any questions. There's Jaya. Jaya, go ahead.
It's Jaya. I just have if there's any this work is so much easier done in community, and I'm wondering if your organization does anything to connect folks with similar interests or concerns and how they can work together.
I assume
That's a
that's
good question.
for
Sorry,
me.
go ahead,
Is
Andrea.
that for me
Yeah.
or for Sail Canada?
It's for you now.
I might toss it back to you in a moment, Nick, or Ryan, so I'll just give you that heads up. So one of the things that I think is interesting in the work that we do at Inclusion Incorporated is both that we're across a number of sectors, as Nick referenced earlier, but across a number of sports. And so the opportunity to share some of the learnings that different sports are having with our friends at Sail Canada as we've gone through has been really rich. And I would say there's resources that some of the other sports have created that I think Sail can learn from. Similarly, other sports can learn from the work Sail's done. So there's sort of that community of practice. As Ryan referenced, the Canadian Olympic Committee has been probably the top funder of inclusion work in the sports system for the last 5 years. Both on safe sport as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so they also share promising practices through their annual forums. And in April, at the meetings that they're hosting, they're actually going to share another project we worked on with artistic swimming around culture change in that sport. So there's different pieces like that that are great connectors. I'm going to throw it back to Nick and Ryan in terms of the Community Sport for All funding, because that's such an opportunity to share promising practices across different sail clubs and communities that you're connecting through that. So I'm just going to put you on the spot for that one.
We'll go over to you, Ryan.
Okay. I love the question, and it's not an easy one to answer sitting in Kingston. And I say that because obviously our membership is spread out across the entire country. The provincial sailing associations have a big role to play in this, and let's separate money from culture and community, because I think it's important in this conversation. there are no shortage of quote unquote private clubs across the country that are currently being asked some pretty interesting questions by their municipalities as they're beginning to renew their leases of what do you do for the local community, which is fostering some really interesting conversations with commodores, with sailing school directors, and managers alike. It's also worth noting because I know that we have a couple of sailing school operators on the call tonight, not just clubs. And granted, I think we're probably about two-thirds in that split. But clubs and schools are starting to ask themselves interesting questions on how do they become stronger community partners. And you know, those volunteer boards and committees don't have all that part figured out. And nor do we as well, which is, you know, part of the importance behind having conversations tonight, or like we are tonight. But I do have regular conversation with my provincial colleagues and counterparts on how to bring new programming opportunities to market. At the end of the day, it's about opportunity and access. So what, you know, I made a comment a couple of weeks ago to the effect of not your average adult doesn't want to learn how to sail for their first time in a 420. They're wet, they're kind of constricted. But on the flip side, a 38-foot cruising boat also is pretty daunting. So at the technical level, we're starting to ask the question of, you know, how do we lean in, sorry, to small keel boats and create new programming around that. This may sound like a funny comment, but foiling is actually pretty cheap to get into depending on the platform that you would go after. So we are looking at the technical level on how do we enable sailing school directors and club managers to bring more training opportunities to market? But then again, there's certainly that cultural change, which we're doing here tonight. But like I said, the provincial sailing associations who have more one-on-one relationships with club and school leaders, they have a big role to play. And I do have those conversations with my colleagues frequently.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Manu is here from our National IDE committee. Her name this evening is iPad. So, Manu, please over to you.
I couldn't change it. Thanks. Hi everyone. Yes, I've been on the IDE committee since the beginning, actually. But before that, I've been a sailing instructor. I've been a racer. I've been lucky enough to cruise my own sailboat across the Atlantic and more. And as a coach as well, I think what I would say is when I entered the committee, the IDE committee, even if it's about inclusion, it was also about sharing passion for sailing. And I think it comes back to that. It's opening sailing to more people, whether from different communities. I mean, when you have a passion, you want to share it. And sometimes I think if we go back to that, it doesn't matter if it's to women, to Aboriginal communities, to able sailors, you know, it's about sharing what we love. And yeah, I think that's it. We don't have to make such a big thing. Yeah, we did a lot of work and trying to see what was the best way to get people into sailing, and without how would I say, because when I try to reach out, sometimes you can do it in a way that you get the opposite effect, like people get scared or they think it's not for them or so and so. So that's why we've been trying to be as inclusive and as cautious as we could. But at the end of the day, it's about sharing our passion for sailing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Manu. Okay. I think that we have I know that we have five or so minutes left. I mean, we can always stay on a little longer if the conversation keeps going. But if you have any questions for the last couple of minutes here that you'd like to ask, please don't hesitate. I see a question from Sail Manitoba. I think that's Jackie in the chat, which is, I wonder if there are any thoughts on how we might attract more of our sailing community to take part / attend these sessions. Oh, Jackie, yeah, that's a great question. That's something that I've been working on for 2 years. I mean, I send these emails out to about almost 20,000 people. You know, we have some great turnout. You know, there's always 70 or so that register and 40 that actually attend. So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge for sure. I'd love to see more of the PSA staff, PSA EDs, PSA boards in attendance on these. We get great support from the Sail Canada staff and Sail Canada board. But I agree, it would be great to see a bit more interaction or attendance at these types of platforms. And I think that I'm just one person, and Sail Canada is just one sort of email outbox, and it would be great if the information about these could be shared far and wide. I mean, there's what do we have right now? 30 people on the call right now, and if 30 people all sent 100 emails out, then that would be 3,000 people that got a direct email that we might be able to stir up some more interest. So I think my answer would be, it goes back to the community and doing your part to sort of spread the word about these, so that we can get as much involvement and get the information out. Sophie, nice to see you as always. Sophie has her hand up.
Hi everyone. Hi Nick. First of all, thank you. What I love about these webinars is just being able to hear everyone's perspective and really to not feel alone or isolated in the work that I and some of my inclusion committee members at our club are trying to do. It connects us to the bigger whole, and it feels like, wow, there is support out there. People are moving in this direction. Because, quite recently, and this is a question directed more to Andrea, I think, a couple of people have said quietly, there's so much going on down south right now that this whole inclusion thing, we just really should just fly under the radar and not talk about it or not do much. And I find that extremely disheartening. My response would be, actually, we need to do more. But then I kind of feel like I'm just going to get my head chopped off if I do that. And I feel like there's the line that you might step over that ruffles feathers has been brought even closer, and it's harder to keep within that line right now. And so I just wanted to ask Andrea in particular, what do you suggest? How do we respond to that when people say, stay under the radar now, don't do much, don't even use the words IDE or DEI or whatever, because it's become such a political hot potato and people are kind of weaponizing that against this compassionate, heartfelt work that we're doing. So yeah, that's my question.
Great question, Sophie. And I love that it came up. I think it's sort of a bit of the piece in the room that everyone's like, ooh, do we talk about that? Do we not talk about it? How do we talk about it? And you can probably imagine that as leaders in this space who are doing this work every day, that we're literally having these conversations on a daily basis right now. 100% we are in a really difficult time politically, and it's having a massive impact on this work. So I want to acknowledge folks that are doing this work and that it's hard work. And, Nick joked earlier about some of the emails that have come through. Those are like harmful and hurtful emails. And the fact that people feel like they have a license to share their opinion in that way, it's astonishing to me. And for those of you that have been on this whole series, we also had an individual join the first two sessions, and I'm just going to name it, who said some really harmful things in the chat, and we actually had to remove them during the second session. That has impacts on those of us doing this work, it has impacts on those of us whose identities are targeted in those comments, and that's not okay. And there may be a license in some political arenas right now to say and do things that we wouldn't have tolerated a few months ago, I'm going to say. But I think we have to hold people to account on those now and going forward. And we have to continue to do the work. To Ryan's earlier point, we haven't seen growth in your sport despite the population growing. So we know there's work to do. We know that we're not supporting the diversity of folks to be part of this sport going forward. We know we're not supporting the diversity of folks in their everyday environments and workplaces and families to be who they are. This work isn't going away. Yes, we may need to name it differently. We may need to position it differently as we go forward. I think those are very real, and you need to think about what's going to land to keep people along this journey without erasing the work. And that's a really interesting balance right now. I also think we need to be recognizing where some of those political wins are, and wins, not wins, like WINDS, certainly a key word in your sport, and actually playing to some of that in some cases. And that makes me sad, but it's real. And I'll give an example. I was at Invictus Games a few weeks ago and speaking with a major company who had just announced that they were cutting their DEI initiatives, and they had an international team there. And I said to them, I was like, okay, like, tell me about this. You're cutting all your DEI. And they looked at me and they're like, no, we're not. We don't have a workforce if we don't do DEI. We are absolutely doing DEI. We are saying publicly different things because we have to stay in the good books of a government that is actively cutting people and canceling organizations who are doing DEI. So they're playing a political game, but the work hadn't changed within that organization, which was actually like really reassuring to hear, even though it was really sad. So I'm just giving you like the full, like, this is the experience right now. We are in a difficult time, but the work can't stop. It's too important. Too many people do not feel like they belong in the spaces and places where they are. And we need to think about how we connect on values and share support for each person, take the time to learn about each person, what their needs are. So inclusion is still kind of at the core of everything we're doing if we want to actually build more diversity in who's part of this sport and the different places and spaces where you are.
Thanks, Andrea. Yannick.
Well,
Sorry, I should give you an intro. Yannick is also on our IDE committee since the beginning and has been a great contributor. Yannick, thanks for being on the call tonight. Over to you.
Pleasure. Well, now I was raising my hand to follow up to Sophie, and Sophie, I believe you were talking from a club level. Am I correct? Like, yes, the club level, and that's my job at this in the IDE committee for Cell Canada. I'm from the club level. I'm the one that brings up all the comments from the grounds up, from, as I always talk about, our wet feet, our 5, 6 years old, all the way to how do we continue supporting our women in sport when we know that, in their teenage years, at some point, there is a dropout. There are statistics. There's like a lot of research has been done on it. How do we get those young women to continue in the sport? That's one area that we've identified. But as far as I always called it IDE, now it's DEI, and again, it's going to change again, right? So I'm speaking to all the club people here, okay? So whether you're part of an IDE committee, a DEI committee formally, or whether you're a board member, this is what I always tell people, and this is what is super important from a club level. Now, my club, I'm happy where I am. Okay, we're doing good work, and we're very proud of it. I'm at ABYC in Toronto, by the way. So I was on the board for 4 years. Now I'm an advisory role, whatever. But what we have come to be as a family at ABYC is that we've put IDE behind everything we do, as opposed to having a formal DE&I big, bold policy that will shock people, or, like an absolute, like, big committee. No, we have a subcommittee that's super informal. Okay. There's 2, maybe 3, 4 of us. We don't even meet. We just chat from time to time. Right. But from a board perspective, when there's when elections are coming up, we have a very strong nominating committee that is looking out with this lens, the DEI lens. Do we have a balance of women on the board? Do we have people of color on the board? Should we have more? Do we have LGBTQ people on the board? Do we have people with disability? And try to not incorporate, that's the wrong word. Try to make sure that from a board level at the top, you are diverse, you are equitable. And if the board in its composition is the direction that will come down from there, like what will come down from the board all the way to the committees and subcommittees and sailing school will resonate, right? And I always give this example, and I have my very good friend, past Commodore, was there. I'm not sure if he's still here. He was Commodore while I was Senior Vice Commodore. And, we had some point on the board, and I said that in one of our last meeting in Sail Canada. And it's sad to say, but I said, we were missing a person of color. Believe it or not, it was sad, okay? We had 2 women in lead position. We had 2 gay men in lead position and 2 straight men, okay? And I said, you know what? What a fantastic 4 years, right? What a way to lead in the future. And no DEI committee in place officially. Just lead from the top and set your goals as a board within yourself. As I said, you don't have to put the big words on paper that are scaring people right now. Just surround yourself with the right people, and you will become an inclusive environment. You will. And then when we started spending some money on junior sailing school, because we give, we have free spaces for underprivileged, youth to come and sail for free, learn to sail for free. Many other clubs are doing the same now, which is fantastic. It's the way to go, right? Become a partner with a local organization. It could be any local organization that supports children, underprivileged children, and give free spaces, how many as you can afford. Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 20? Whatever you can afford. Bring those youth for free to start and learn to sail. Because Andrea started with that. We have a barrier, and one of the barriers is money. And Ryan says, well, you can get into foiling. It's not that expensive. But if you're a 7-year-old child of an immigrant that just got here 2 years ago, your parents can't afford to send you to summer sailing camp for a week. They just can't. But if some of their community leaders can identify those people, those youth that may benefit from growing and from those programs, then you incorporate them. But then you also have to give yourself the tool to learn and see and identify if these children have a potential to grow so that they come back. And if they come back, do we need to find more money to help them come back? Do we need to find more money to help them continue? Will they become a very good little sailor and maybe a racer? And if they are becoming a racer, I can tell you, these parents will not be able to afford them to become a racer in the sailing community. So where do you put your priorities? So you try to find some ways to make accommodation so that if you find these little gems, because again, this is Sail Canada you're speaking to. And Sophie, it's been said many times, our provincial organization are more in touch with us as clubs, right? But without the clubs, you're not going to get the Olympians. We train them. So that's where I'm at the bottom, they're at the top, but we all work together. And that's what, Manu said, share the love of sailing. Well, share it in a way that is respectful. And Andrea said it best, you need, especially in the current environment, you just need to massage the messaging, right? As in, it has to still be there without being in your face. And that will change again. There's always a pendulum, right? And, we're lucky that we live in Canada. That's all I have to tell you. We are extremely lucky, and that, you got to take what you get, right? The baby steps that we're making are important. Will the Olympic eventually have all classes of individual racers to be unigender? Probably not. Okay. Are they doing something good by introducing, double-gendered, double-handed, double-handed in, yes, that's a start. Okay. But that's at the very top. But no, Sarah Douglas is never going to compete against a man. It's not going to happen in her lifetime. And, you know, and that's the way it is. But where are we at today? We're not going to change the world overnight, but you know what? It's like before, when we started this, Manu, you remember, our first meeting was in January of 2020. And then the pandemic happened. And it was like we had one meeting, okay? And in that one meeting, it was a long one. It was a very long meeting. You weren't there yet, Nick. And at the bottom, we came to the bottom of it and said, we can't do this alone as volunteer without money. We can't do all this work. It's just like a bunch of volunteer, okay? And we grew. The committee grew. Cell Canada listened to our needs. Inclusion Inc. was brought in, right? And staff was dedicated, Cell Canada staff were dedicated to us as a committee. So, money comes in different places and helps somewhere, somehow. And they heard us. We said, none of this is going to happen. We said, we want to show, we had a list, and we can eventually, it's published, but what we wanted to achieve, well, some of it we have. Those webinars you're looking at, we talked about that in January 2020. This is where we want to end up. And this is where we want to have booklets available for download on Cell Canada. We want them to be mandatory training for some mandatory training for the coaches and for the race instructor, the instructors, So that's all trickling down. And eventually we got some money to publish some of these. Our provincial organizations are going to push this down to the club level. Like, this is all interconnected. So
thanks, Yannick.
I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to have that, because this is the last session of these webinars for this year. And I believe that the people that are on this call today probably were here before. They just didn't show up at the last minute, right? And I want to give a message of hope and positivity that things can change. And they can change if you put the effort into it. So look, I'm just preaching to the choir, obviously, but, I'm just trying to make everybody understand that nothing happens overnight, and you have to surround yourself with like-minded people and jerks. Yes, of course. You got to work.
Jerks are what fuel us, right? They keep us going.
Work with them. You don't have a choice. It's the way it is.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Yannick. I think that's a really perfect positive note to go out on. I'll keep it brief. Do an Irish goodbye, since yesterday was St. Paddy's Day. Andrea, thank you and your team so much for helping us with these. Cell Canada, thank you for continuing to fund these and ongoing IDE work. And to all of the participants tonight and from the other 4 sessions this year, we appreciate your time, and hopefully you've learned. And this is something that you can share via the postings, the recordings on the website. And if you need anything, or if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to me. It's nick@sailing.ca, but hopefully you all received that email from me today anyways. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great night, and look forward to the next time that we have the ability to host one of these. Thank you, Andrea. Thanks, Ryan, for joining.
Pleasure.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Nick.